explain that to people, they're like, oh yeah, I mean,
that makes sense.
That makes sense,
right?
you know.
Right.
But then there's like this. Well, why hasn't anyone ever taught me that? And it's like, well, that's a problem, you know. So anyway,
I love that you point that out too, because I feel like
Yeah.
one of the things in our little Catholic world that we deal with, and having come from Protestantism, I know it's a reality there, and you've kind of just spoken to this, is that there's a really big problem with catechesis in Christianity in general in America right now. And I think regardless of which stream you're coming from, you know, because a lot of like cradle Catholics will talk to us like, wow, there's all this stuff I never knew about why we believe this. And in all the churches we were in before, it was the same sort of thing where when someone really starts to engage their faith deeply, there's sort of that catechesis and formation that happens. They go, why did I never know that? You know? Which I think speaks to a broader problem in America maybe, but it's not, you know, for Catholics or Protestants listening, it's not just your stream necessarily.
Yeah, right.
It's kind of like a cultural issue where people, I don't know if it was just that Sunday school sucked for a while or what it was, but there seems to be a lot of people that are like, wow, there's these basic things that, you know, like in Paul's letters, he would have called elementary, that a lot of people just don't even have an awareness of.
Yeah, I think that people, the cultural religion side of it, that it's religiosity. Yeah. Like, and to, I don't want to say to our shame, but just the churches in general have not said, well, this is what's required for you to be a faithful Christian. We would say, well, now we don't even say to go to church. It's just like, well, believe in your heart and you're good.
Yeah, whatever that means.
And like when Jesus said in Romans 10, confess with your mouth and believe in your heart and you'll be saved. Like he didn't mean kind of confess and kind of believe in your heart. Like these were things that would produce a very distinct way of living. And so in our culture, it's like, well, you can be a Christian without going to church. Right. You can be a Christian without.
I went to an altar call one time though, Rick. I'm good.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
I
gave
that summer camp. I got saved.
Yeah.
And
then I got resaved. I got saved again. Yeah.
No, that's a big point. I forget who the scholar is, but there is a book that's been coming out in sort of a stream in theology, and I guess I'm interested in your take. I think it's a Protestant fellow, but he kind of writes. I think the book is titled "Salvation by Allegiance Alone." You know, kind of like on the whole faith alone thing, but faith in the Judaic context of Jesus' day wouldn't have just meant an intellectual assent. Right. With no change in your life. It would have meant holistic allegiance in every part of your life to whatever your faith is in. You know, in the same way that like being faithful to your wife and having faith in your wife doesn't just mean like I believe she exists. It's like there are parameters to that relationship.
Yeah.
Right?
And this is what James says. Yeah. Like show me your faith
the only
by
time
your
faith
works.
alone is in the Bible.
Right. Well, there's an element of like I always say, if you believe your house is on fire, you're going to do something about it. Yeah. Like, you're not going to be like, oh, it's, you know,
it's like the meme where it's on fire, like, this is fine. Yeah.
Yeah. It produces action. And everyone knows that. Like, nobody's really deceived about that. Sure. The reality is, and we say this a lot, everyone wants the kingdom without the king. They want the kingdom of Christ. They want the blessings, eternal promises, the joy, happiness, life's good. They want the promises of the kingdom without the king.
Do you listen to John Mark Comer at all?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, because I say he's used that exact line before.
Okay.
So before we converted, I was really into that stream and his whole church movement and stuff. Okay. And they were really into like the disciplines and things like that. And he talks a lot about that in terms of the secularization of culture and all the values of secularism. In a sense, are historic Christian social teaching of some sense, kind of stripped of the meat. Yeah. You know, so you have this framework without the. Well, I think part of the struggle that evangelicals are figuring out, and even Catholics, is how do we engage well with the culture? Yeah. Because there's the fundamentalist side who just want to pull back and isolate. We just don't engage. Yeah.
Right, and then there's those who want to engage, and it kind of actually just goes woke, and I use that
totally. Yeah.
I use that term like understandingly, like not like they seek to do good, and what happens is they seek to do good based on the world's standards of good,
and then they just become like the world.
Exactly. Yeah. Instead of saying, well, I don't want to recede back. I want to step into culture. Yeah. But how do I do that while holding fast to my faith? Right. And I think that's something, Tim Keller is an example of someone in the Protestant side who's done this probably well.
Timmy K, man, some good stuff.
It's like, well, let's talk about it. Let's not just pull back and say, well, it's all going to burn and they're going to burn.
Yeah,
and,
none of their works are going to last, so we might as well just leave them hanging.
Yeah. So it's a hard thing, though. I think is to go back to your thing about catechesis and how do you catechize and help people understand, like, when David wrote in Psalm 119, I have hidden your word in my heart so that I might not sin against you. Mm-hmm. Understanding, memorizing questions and answers develops a systematic theology in our mind that the 4-year-olds don't know that, and the 12-year-olds might not know that. But as an adults, we know that because that's what a worldview is.
Right.
It's questions and answers. And
absolutely.
Like, if we leave that empty, it will be filled.
By whatever you're surrounded by. Really.
Right, exactly. And we've just acted like, well, we have church on Sunday, and maybe we even read the Bible at home sometimes, and we don't watch dirty movies.
Sure.
So we're okay. It's like, man, that has not proven anything.
Well, and I think formation is so deep too, and I think there's a lot of senses in which there's this whole movement in Protestantism especially, but even in Catholic circles to contextualize, in our case, the liturgy, and in your guys' case, your worship services towards what's cultural. You know, like let's have fog machines and really cool worship, or let's sing hymns, in our case, that are popular, but they're really from the 70s, so now they're outdated. It's just, it's a whole mess. But it's like, well, if we can make it look appealing to what the world wants, then maybe they'll come to church, and we can sneak Jesus in there, which is, in a sense, it's almost dishonest, because it's like you're hiding Jesus in your pizza party, and they're like, well, why don't I just go to the pizza party without Jesus, you know? But then on the other hand, kind of what you mentioned is, if you contextualize to the culture, in our culture that doesn't work. Like if you're on the mission field in Africa and they've never had the gospel, and you're going to a pre-Christian culture, you can take the element, because they're probably a spiritual people, you can take the appropriate elements of that culture and contextualize the gospel within it pretty effectively. But in American culture, it's all built off of stripping the gospel out. And so to contextualize to it is to do that as well. To gut it.
Well, and the
it's
idea
like the ultimate Trojan horse.
Well, it is, and it's like, I think the hard part is you either believe that everyone needs Jesus to live, or you don't.
Right.
If you believe that they do, then that's going to shape, again, how you live, what you do with your days, how you interact with your neighbors. Whereas if you believe like Jesus would be a benefit to them, but they don't necessarily need them.
Yeah, he's a nice accessory.
Yeah, and that changes. Like, you're like, let's have a party and let's have some fun and let's bring Jesus in because he's a good friend of ours too.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, man, this is life and death. This is serious.